in 2019, and I think the millions that came in the years of his premiership represents the greatest betrayal of democratic wishes, certainly in anyone's living memory. This is not what Brexit voters wanted, and it's certainly not what any Conservative voter wanted from 2010 onwards, where in election after election after election they were promised that net migration would come down to tens of thousands a year, and we learn it was up to, in the worst year, 1 million, although we haven't yet got the revisions. By the time they come in, it almost certainly will be over 1 million. The anticipated cost of the 800,000 plus who will qualify for indefinite leave to remain over the course of the next 3 to 4 years, the anticipated cost of this group of people is a staggering £230 billion. It is absolutely an eye-watering sum of money. We will not only say that these people do not qualify for indefinite leave to remain, we will abolish indefinite leave to remain as a category in this country. Zia will lay out in a minute the... Oh dear. That's not very good, is it? Well, things go wrong, hey. We'll laugh and carry on. Zia will outline the visa scheme in just a moment. But, you know, you come on a work visa. You can't bring a dependent with you. You can't claim benefits. And, of course, there'll be a route to citizenship, but a much tougher route to citizenship than we currently have. As I say, we will become like normal countries all over the world. And it's vital that we do this and vital that we get it right. This is grossly unfair on taxpayers. They are being absolutely And in terms of the national debt, which I touched on earlier, well, we've got major, major problems looming there already. We are not the world's food bank. It is not for us to provide welfare for people coming in from all over the world. The 800,000 people that will get indefinite leave to remain unless this policy is revoked tend to be young, tend to be low-skilled. They are going to be a huge burden on the state. And yes, of course, there's been debate in the newspapers this morning about those already here with indefinite leave to remain. And we just don't know. We don't know, because the figures aren't available, just how many of those are currently claiming benefits. What we do know is that 1 in 6 claimants of universal credit alone today, 1 in 6 is a foreign-born national. We don't have the relevant figures for PIP and many of the other benefits that are available. Getting numbers out of this and the last government has proved a very difficult thing to do. So yes, we'll have work visas, and I've made it very, very clear. You come here to work and you're working. And what we're announcing today is, without doubt, a very bold set of proposals. It takes us away from where the debate in British politics has been for the last 25 years, but it does actually put the British people first. And that's why the document is entitled Prioritising UK Citizens. And that is the right, proper, decent and fair thing to do. I will hand over now to Zia Youssef.
Good morning, everyone. So as Nigel has just outlined, Britain is facing a looming fiscal disaster. The Boris wave, in fact, actually the biggest betrayal the Tory government inflicted on this country has not yet exploded. That is the Boris wave. That is the millions of largely low-skilled, unskilled, non-EU migrants that were allowed to come to this country with more dependents than ever before, who will, in the coming years, be eligible to apply for indefinite, for ILR, indefinite leave to remain. So how do we solve this problem? And how do we finally, as Nigel says, put British people first, give British young people asymmetric access to our labour market, sort out the fact that for decades now, actually, in this country, business has had unlimited access to dirt cheap foreign labour at the expense of British workers, and probably most punishing of all for the long-suffering British taxpayer, the enormous amount of money that is spent on welfare at the behest of the British taxpayer for foreign nationals. So here's our solution. Firstly, we abolish ILR altogether. We will replace it with a 5-year renewable work visa, just like a lot of other countries do, America, the UAE, many comparators out there. The qualifying salary for this work visa will be materially higher than it is today. The specific number will be determined by our net fiscal modeling close to a general election, because that's the sensible and responsible thing to do, but it will be materially higher than it is today. Number two, you cannot have criminal convictions. Number three, as Nigel says, when he's Prime Minister, we will ensure we legislate so that foreign nationals are ineligible to claim welfare. That 1 in 6 number Nigel mentioned is a catastrophe. It's cost us £9 billion last year alone. And again, I want to emphasize that's before the impact of the Boris wave has actually been felt. So we have to make these changes. It's the only way we can prevent the UK, frankly, going bankrupt many times over as a result of these issues. We will also introduce an English standards test. So we will materially increase the required threshold of English needed to qualify for this 5-year renewable visa. And because it's renewable, it means we continue to adhere to those conditions in order to get it renewed after 5 years. That's exactly the sort of thing America does, for example, and it ensures the appropriate level of compliance. We will also increase the number of years you need to be in this country to qualify for British citizenship. The British passport is incredibly precious. We think it's the best passport in the world. It should be treated as such. So we will increase that threshold to 7 years. Now, we are obviously aware that there are certain job functions in this country that are reliant on foreign labour, without which there would be material detriment to British people. We call these national critical roles. So as a result of that, we will create something called an ASSV, an acute skills shortage visa. These will be strictly limited in number. There will be a finite cap at the start of the year. And really importantly, any employer that is sponsoring via this visa and benefits from it will have to pay a levy that in turn is spent on training the equivalent British worker for that role. This has insanely never really happened before, which is why it just goes on and on and on, and the acute turns into the chronic. So by implementing this policy, we will ensure that, for example, our care homes do have enough workers, but we'll go into the detail on that. That doesn't mean they can bring infinity dependence. But what it will mean is the national critical functions will be fulfilled in the near term, but, big but, British people will be trained up to do those jobs so that, to the degree we do issue those ASSVs, it will build long-term native British capacity. That's a really, really important part of the changes we're making. I also want to be clear, the existing routes for entrepreneurs, brilliant founders, for investors who want to come invest millions of pounds in this country, you are welcome. And in fact, in the coming months and years, we will announce more routes to do just that. You've already heard our Britannia card policy. Now, one of the interesting things about all of these policies we have announced here is that they can be summed up by the statement that a reform government under Nigel expects migrants to more than pay their way, not commit crime, and ultimately to speak English and contribute to this country. The fact that this is in any way controversial says more about the state of decay and malaise and betrayal that the political class has inflicted on this country. So I want to say one other thing, because Nigel mentioned it, but I just cannot emphasize this enough. You're probably going to have questions about, is it 234 billion? Is it 200 billion? Is it 400 billion? I want to make this point. The government chooses to hide data about the visa status and nationality of people using the NHS. So we don't know what that cost item is. It chooses to hide the same for state pension recipients. It chooses to hide the same for PIP, disability recipients. And it chooses to hide the same for social care. These are enormous cost items. Ask yourselves why they hide those numbers. The true scale of this fiscal disaster that is looming on this country, if we do not get a reformed government and if Nigel's not the Prime Minister, in reality is much, much higher than that £234 billion a year. And that's before we talk about the robbing of British people of their culture, the robbing of our young people of opportunity. You know, Boris Johnson was in the last week, wrote an op-ed lambasting our younger generation for being wet, for being wimps. Now, look, there are many challenges that ail our young generation, and of course they're not perfect. But no older generation in this country had to compete with so much cheap, unskilled foreign labour coming into this country. So I personally thought Boris Johnson having the gall to write such a thing was a bit rich. But look, ultimately, what this comes down to is prioritising British people for British jobs, ensuring that our welfare system is for UK citizens and UK citizens only, and ensuring that that Boris wave of enormous numbers, millions, in fact 3.8 million, is what you would consider to be in the Boris wave. The 800,000 of that one might estimate would get ILR. I want to emphasise this point too, actually. This is a really important point to note. That makes assumptions about the take-up of ILR that are based on historic data. That historic data was when EU nationals were the majority of the incoming net legal migration cohorts. This is flipped completely on its head. So even that would suggest that the assumption of 234 billion is way too low, because I put it to you, no matter what your political persuasion, try to be objective about answering this question. Do you think French people and Swedish people and Finns are more or less likely to apply for ILR and ultimately citizenship in this country than people from India, Afghanistan, or Pakistan? I think we all know the answer to that question. So I want to emphasize again, the magnitude of this looming fiscal disaster is huge. Reform will solve the problem. Thank you very much, and we'll take questions.
Thank you, sir. Zia, thank you. Unlike, I think, the other parties. And we're going to begin with Ian Watson from the BBC. There's a microphone.
Yes, sir. You may well have anticipated some of these questions, but let's ask you firstly a specific question, then a more general question. Specifically, the first line of this document and the last line quotes a £230 billion figure, which the Centre for Policy Studies, who come up with the figure, say is no longer. Will you withdraw that figure? More generally, isn't it the case that people are more concerned about what is going on in the Channel than with people who are already here, who've passed English language tests, who are perhaps paid modestly in the care sector? And doesn't it sit uncomfortably with a British sense of fair play to tell people who think they're here indefinitely that they've got to leave?
That is without doubt too low. It underestimates things. I suspect many more than 800,000 actually will apply for indefinite leave to remain. Plus, it's quite tough to get all of the figures. And if you go back to those who've already been granted indefinite leave to remain, without doubt, the number is considerably bigger. The British public are very focused on what's happening in the English Channel. That is right, because it's visible, it's there for all to see, and you now have Conservative and Labour governments both promising they'll do something about it. So the issue's become a very big national issue, and people are worried, as we saw with the Bell Hotel in Epping. They're worried about crime, they're worried about national security. There has not been a proper debate on legal immigration because all the so-called main political parties have agreed. Both Labour and Conservative governments have been happy to have open-door migration. The Liberal Democrats obviously would not criticise, nor the SNP, nor the Greens, nor anybody. And that is why we've not had a proper, full national debate about this. What we are attempting to do today is to make people realise that large-scale migration into Britain, where 50% at least of those that come will never work and live off the British poorer. And we want to have that debate. Quite how the Labour and Conservatives will defend themselves against this, I don't know. So we want to have an honest debate. And you talk to me about a sense of fair play. Yes, you're quite right. A fair play to British people who've been priced out of the market, where minimum wage has become maximum wage in many, many sectors, where employers and others haven't bothered to upskill British people by relying on endless cheap foreign labour coming into Britain. This is the end of endless cheap foreign labour and an attempt to get young British people trained up to do the right jobs with the right pay. Thank you. Olivia Utley from GB News.
Thank you. Under your proposals, those applying for citizenship